Okay, I guess we're going to get rolling. Good afternoon, everyone. How's it going at BSides?
Yeah.
It looks like a really great conference today. I'm excited to be here. I want to thank BSides for inviting me, and also I'm glad you guys all made it. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate that. Because we're at BSides, I really like to make this kind of conversational, as opposed to just me babbling the whole time. I thought it would be nice if it was a little interactive. I really like to focus on business value, impact, and outcomes. As opposed to here, we're not going to really focus on a lot of cyber risk, but more on practice and executional risk for AI, and how to use it and how to think about it really practically and pragmatically. So I got into tech really to support people to help others. And along that journey, it was quite a while ago, about 3 decades ago, I found myself really helping organizations help their users, right? And that kind of pulled me away from what I was doing. It was a great journey, but tech was so complicated that I realized all the things that I like to do, I had to do them for big organizations. It was a great journey, and I love that stuff too as well. But I've also really been focusing on much more of the practical and pragmatic thoughts around AI, and the risks related to business, as opposed to all the cyber risks, although there are many of those as well. And I have been, of course, digging into those. One thing I wanted to clarify was that on the bio, it says that I'm part of M&T. Today I am not. I left there in August. I'm currently at my own LLC, just doing some advisory and consulting and some blogging and writing and research. I have been at 8 startups. I started this journey, my first startup was back in '95. I ended up in Silicon Valley, and I ended up at an organization, we built the world's first SSL toolkit. And it was after I had been at the state of Wisconsin, and I had been at the university, and I helped the state of Wisconsin get to the internet, which was pretty cool. It was a place where, when I went to that first startup that we did the SSL toolkit, it was an e-commerce startup. And all my friends thought I was crazy. They were like, you think we're going to use money on our computers? What does that mean? And I was like, we'll see. I'm not going to make predictions, but I have a feeling that this will have a much bigger impact on society than we anticipate, as it has. And so I ended up getting into security because one of the first largest, the Department of Health and Social Services in Wisconsin that I went to work for, they wanted to bring up all of their stuff on the internet. And I was like, this is Medicaid and Medicare and SSI stuff, right? We were the largest state agency. We handed out like $4 billion in checks. And I was like, how are we going to put ourselves on the internet? What does that mean? So I started back then thinking about what does it mean. But really, I think of myself as a technologist trying to help technologies, move operationally sustainable and maintain risk, some notion of risk management, right? The reality is everyone's going to face a breach or a compromise or some kind of impact. The question isn't really whether we stop them. The question is whether we can identify them really quickly and recover really well. Because the reality is especially as AI is brought to us, we can't control really the actors, the malicious actors out there. We really have to just be able to respond and recover. And so, and I've worked in a variety of industries. I've done consulting. I've worked at a lot of vendors, as I said, 8 startups. And I've also been a full-time employee at a variety of places. So I like to kind of bring those together because I think they all have different impact and vantage points. And so I try and bring those experiences and skills in a way that are practical, right? Vendors are really important, but they really push product, right? Consultants also have a good third perspective on what's going on. They're not embedded, right? They can see outside, but they also have their own objectives and goals. And then organizations, are constantly struggling to figure out what is a path to actually leverage technology effectively, sustainably, and maintain our risk, right? And so I've been digging in a lot. When I started exploring AI a lot about a year ago, I was really digging into how can it help me, how can it help my mom, how can it help my friends. I had the cyber lens on because that's the world I've lived in for so long. But the reality was I didn't want to support large companies all the time and just securing theirs. I wanted to figure out how this technology could really help advance the people I know, small businesses, the individuals, the students. How can we leverage it in a way that has other value besides just, building out operations sustainably. And it's been quite a circuitous journey. AI is interesting. My journey started, so it really started around doing a whole bunch of blogging. It started with some like resume career stuff I was exploring, and then it started also, the other place I started was 3Pass, was the, how do we secure agents? Because I really think we have the capacity to secure agents today with the compute power we have in a much different way than we have in the past. One example was I was able to build out a full stack enterprise scale environment just on a laptop, which was quite shocking to me at the time. I was like, wow, okay, so we can do this at enterprise level scale with enterprise controls, but we can do it in really small frames. And I realized that small businesses could really benefit from this, and medium-sized businesses, right? They're always struggling with technology, and technologists, they can't usually afford the best technologists in the world. Technologists often go place to place. And and I was realizing, though, that I really wanted to figure out how smaller businesses can make it really impactful, because it's a really big leap forward, right, for what they can do. It does incredible things. But along that circuitous journey, I realized I've been in front of a lot of technology, but I've always been at the pointy end of the stick. And my realization with AI was that it just requires all the same things we've been doing for any technology I deploy, right? Whether, back in the day it was new firewalls, or intrusion detection, or SQL servers, data storage, and data capacity, right? All of a sudden I realized that AI still had all the same problems. While the market hypes it as a solution, it's really a tech. And it's a tech that technologists or technologist-aware people really have to think about how to deploy securely and safely for their user community, right, for their organization, for themselves. And I was like, oh, okay. So not only can we build sort of really enterprise level processes and practices and controls around it, but we also really have to think about how the user is going to function with this and use it really effectively, and how do we enable them to, a small business needs to focus on their business model, right, not on their tech stack. And I was like, and AI really enables you to do a lot of things, and I was like, okay, this is perfect. I've been kind of waiting for this for decades, right? As development tools came in and really advanced technology and development life cycles and software development, that was wonderful, but the reality is the small business owners still couldn't use that, right? And then there was cloud. That was wonderful too. They didn't have to support their own infrastructure, but they still had to maintain it all. They still had to build all the apps. And so I realized that this could give an opportunity for smaller businesses to jump into much deeper tech, but that it still has a lot of failings and a lot of challenges. So I've been sort of focusing on the practical and pragmatic, right? How does a small business, or how does my mom use it in a way that I'm not worried that she's going to give away all her credentials and all her money? And how can a small business start to use it without having deep technologists? Because it lets you do an awful lot of things. And so as I was using AI, I was realizing all of this, right? I was running into all these failure modes for me, and that seemed a little extreme, but what was happening was I was believing the hype. I was like, AI does it. It does brilliant things. It's really incredible. And you get caught up in that hype, in that allowing it to do things, and then you realize, wow, it's going to do things the way it likes. So this conversation is really about that. I did want to open it up to a couple questions, and that is around, is everyone in here using AI? Are we using it as a tool to do your job? Are you using it as an infrastructure to build as well? All of these things? When you guys say you're using AI, does that mean you're using Claude and ChatGPT to produce papers, roadmaps, strategy docs, things like that?
Get Copilot.
What was that?
Get Copilot.
Get Copilot? For your user base to be able to use
Actually,
it?
just for our security teams.
And security, just the security team is using it. Okay, that's really interesting.
Use cases for each one.
You have use cases for each of those audiences. Yeah, they're important. Okay, and the other piece I was curious is have people here built organizations or teams or products and solutions?
Yep.
Because when I've been thinking about this, one of the things I realized about AI, it was and people hear this, is these agents are your team, right? These clients are your team. And it has all the same problems, right? And in fact, it even has more. because, and one of the things I ran into is that, for example, I would ask it to do something, and it would go off and do something, then I would ask it to change that thing, and it could change it. But the reality is I needed it to be able to live outside of that session. And so what I realized, like a human, like all the people we're traditionally used to working with and managing, it's like us, it like loses context, right? It doesn't understand all the things that have already been done. And so even though when you talk to an AI, it seems to have all this context, it's context for it within that session. A, that session gets compressed, you lose context. B, when you try and then go ask someone else about it or a different agent about it, it has no context. And the funny part is it was doing everything that I would run into with my teams. Hey, go build me a PowerPoint presentation. And they'd go off and build it, but if I didn't give them the right instructions, right, they would build whatever they wanted. And so AI is exactly the same way. It's like, how do you give it the context? How do you have that partnership, collaboration, and relationship with it? That I thought was really funny. I was like, wow, okay. So I'm now working with a really intelligent machine that responds to me and talks to me like a person. But the reality is they also have all the same limitations. They get overly excited, or they're particularly, they have both optimism, but they also think of failure modes, right? And they also change their paths randomly. And so, there was like really a lot of excitement, but then I started running into a bunch of issues. So I'm going to talk about some of the issues that I ran into as I was walking through this, as a practical person, just a user, and then how I started applying sort of my skills and experience to think about this differently at scale. So let's see, from chaos to sort of like the idea of I think the AI landscape is total chaos, right? AIs are building AI solutions for people to buy and deploy, and it's really smart. It tells you really a lot of great things, and then you realize it doesn't actually know what it's talking about, right? So this is a little about that journey. So the promise and reality. The way I think about AI is really, for me, it's an intelligent thread. Okay, AI is incredibly good at weaving together disparate systems, disparate data, disparate processes, and sort of tying them all together. But again, it's not the system, right? It is also incredibly well at synthesizing concepts and data across boundaries and patterns, right? It can see whether it's patterns in content, whether it's patterns in systems. It's brilliant at this, right? Like how it can explore a blog or how it can explore a system and tell you what's going on is fabulous and incredible. And then it can take actions at light speed, right? Like much faster than any of us can function, right? It can write a blog or a paper or a strategy within literally minutes. And I have to admit, you get taken back by how good they are. They're incredibly well if you're writing the right prompts. So that's how I think about it. It's an intelligent thread. That's how it should be used to weave together our systems. Whether a large enterprise has multiple identity and access management systems, then they need to weave, together, let's say, Entra on your cloud instance, right? And your Active Directory infrastructure. If they're out of sync, it does a great job of being able to show you a unified view into what's going on. You can see all the roles and groups all associated, all the identities that are missing from systems, right? So it really weaves these together, and then it can take action. It can tell it to go change a bunch of things, and if it has access, it will figure out how to do that, right? It'll test on the API, it'll test on a login, it'll test direct network access. It'll do it really quickly and rapidly, and that's an incredible thing. In the same respect, so the promise is really good, right? It summarizes large bodies of data, it identifies massive patterns, allows you to write blogs and architectural diagrams and resumes. It's really good at retrieving data if you can point it at the right data sources, whether it's the internet, whether it's the data store, whether it's your local file system, whatever it is. And then it also, like I said, it executes multi-step tasks, and it can figure them out on its own, or it can follow a user and then learn them all and then do it, execute very well. Now what I realized is that then the honeymoon ends. It gives you so much access and so much information, right? That once you start to, when I think of substantial, once you start to build something substantial, that really requires evolution, and that really requires the use of others, you start to realize you own the context. And even though the AI can tell you everything you think about it, that doesn't mean anyone else can, right? And that doesn't mean you actually understand why it's even telling you that. one of the things is, I realize that AI feels so human to me, right? Like when it's excited, it'll tell me something is working when it's not, right? Because it's just enthusiastic about that, right? When it's not doing something well, it'll just try to solve the problem in the background. I won't have any idea what it's doing, right? And then it'll come back. And so what I realized is that what happened was I started to launch, so I just started with some blogs, and that was pretty easy. Individual, single streams are pretty good as long as you take some time to review and edit, and we'll go through those steps. But once I had like 3 blogs running concurrently, there were a couple problems. I couldn't track everything it was doing effectively across all 3 to 5 blogs. I couldn't track all of its changes effectively. It was throwing a ton of data at me. And all of a sudden I realized this is the same problem we've always had with tech once you launch it, right? Is that now I have to figure out what's the state of every single one of those blogs. It would tell me they were in the right state when they weren't and things like that. So I realized that like the evolution and the sustainability and the operational management of AI was the exact same problem we always had. Just like when Word came, right? When everyone started to use word processors, right? All of a sudden they were writing 10 docs and they lost track of which one they were at, right? There were so many things flowing. And so to use AI for like a discrete task works incredibly well, right? One blog, one action, you can track it, you can follow it. I really found the problems happen once I got into multiple ones. So I ran into a few failures, right? Context loss. I was convinced like the AI, I would tell the AI, for example, to do version control. And sure enough, it would do version control for a little while and then it would start to stop, which is randomly not. So the files that it was writing were no more version control, and I would have multiple version 1s or whatever, and I couldn't figure out where all that was, right? It also, when you go across sessions like we were talking, it doesn't remember. It needs that context. And if either your session window runs out, which it does all the time, or for some other reason you've built something that it needs to reload your Claude ND or something, you're going to have to open up a new session, and that new session doesn't know anything. So now not only did I have to figure out how to track all the versions that it was getting, I had to realize that I had to be able to provide the same context for the next session, right? It didn't know what I was doing, so it loses context. And like the silent contradictions, it does this all the time, right? Like I said, we will agree, me and my friend, the AI, will agree on versioning, and next thing you know, it'll just drop it. Okay, so one is sort of this notion of context loss, where it's going to forget what you're doing, where you're at. The other one is like hallucinations, confidence without accuracy. It tells you all sorts of things. Like it cited me frameworks that didn't exist, right? It gave quotes that didn't exist. It invents statistics that says something is X, Y, or Z accurate, and that was a failure. It wasn't. And it doesn't know how to say I'm not sure. Right, it really doesn't question itself. One of my friends, he's a lawyer at a really, really big law firm, and they were doing a brief, and it wasn't until 3 days before the brief was due for court that they realized the AI had changed the core quote for the contractual language they were going into court for, and so everything was based on the wrong part of the contract language, and it misinterpreted it, and people didn't find it until 3 days before, and they were just scrambling. So, so there's hallucinations and there's this notion of confidence that it has. And then there's drifts and tangents. It does whatever it wants. One day I just asked it to change the tone of, one paragraph. And sure enough, it changed the whole blog, every single thing on it. It changed the tone for the whole blog, and it turned everything into single sentence statements, right? That wasn't so bad, I got to fix it. I forgot about it the next time, and I went 2 or 3 revisions down, just focusing on one paragraph, and I realized that it had changed it 3 revisions before. And how do you get back to that, right? Because your session, if it's writing files, chances are, once it writes the next file, it's not gonna have the old files, right? Depending on how you're doing that. Are these things that are consistent with people see? People understand and recognize that it's running and that our users are out there doing crazy things that are really cool. And then sure enough, we hit a log. One of the things, a friend of mine is at OpenAI, and when they launched sort of their native AI first, they required everyone in the company about 3 or 4 months ago to do just AI first, not to write it yourself. What they found was a really interesting thing is that their non-techs were producing much more outputs and skills. because they didn't come into it with all these frames of I'm worried about all this risk. So they started producing incredible things. And the devs were much further behind in terms of their velocity of production, which I thought was interesting. And that was a real hard balance for them. But this is what it does, right? Is it enables people without deep tech experience and knowledge to do an awful lot of things. But it has all of these failure modes. So this isn't theoretical. One of the things that happened was for my original deck, it decided that I was the executive director of this conference. Even though I changed it 3 times, it changed it back 3 times. And that was funny, right? There's things like, prompt injection. They sold a Tahoe for $1, and they had 20 million views, and they had a back-end process that was wrong. Air Canada had a refund policy that an AI chat built, and it wasn't their actual one, and they had to go to court. They tried to claim that it wasn't their responsibility, it was the AI's. Court corrected that, but I did think that was quite entertaining for them to claim that. And Starbucks, their inventory in the last several weeks or a month or so went haywire, and they had to pull their AI system. I thought this one was an interesting one. New York City built one that told businesses they could pocket tips and discriminate. So a bunch of them went out and started to do that, and then they realized the law was different. I don't know if everyone has recently heard of Sullivan and Cromwell. There was a law firm that submitted a brief to a court, a really massive one, and it had all sorts of AI errors and hallucinations on on the data they presented to court. It's now brought in now they're reevaluating 1,200 cases because of this. And then, I don't know if everyone's heard, but obviously there was a teen suicide, right? And the state of Florida decided to take on OpenAI. Again, the teen wasn't given any wrong information, but they were encouraged to do things that they shouldn't have. And so, this is where AI, and I'll get to that and see if it's next. So I might jump around a little. So these things are real. They're happening live. They're happening all the time, right? The data suggests that about 95% of the AI efforts out there in enterprises are failing to meet their expectations, and only about 5% are successful. And this is because, again, the tool is so powerful, we get caught up in what the possibilities are, but we kind of forget how to get there. And really, I just think of it as at some level, I was hoping to toss away some of my experience and be able to start fresh. And I realized that actually all that experience is just as required for AI, right? It's no different than when you're deploying any technology, whether it's a cyber technology or a user case technology. So what I think about it is it does a lot of things and it'll write content for you. But like I said, I produced a bunch of blogs, and I didn't realize until 3 later that it had changed a bunch of things that I didn't expect it to do. And when I was running directly on an AI desktop, I realized I had no reversibility. Nothing was being saved, nothing was being maintained, and then I couldn't actually reverse back. So while there's really positive consequences, you got to remember that not all those consequences are what you intend, and you need a way of dropping back and being reversible, right? You need a way to go back to old versions. So this is again where I realized all of these governance practices and some of the bureaucracy we put in place have a lot of value. And I think this is important. You got to remember that, and our users have to remember that AI was built to really be user positive, right? They affirm everything you ask, right? They are very pleasing, they move fast, they always want to finish everything. It'll tell me, hey, there's 10 problems. And then all of a sudden it'll say, but let's just move forward, you don't have to worry about any of those, right? And I'm like, okay, that's right. And then, for it thinks of success, it would always tell me, this is your final. Final? And, but it was that's what I wrote, isn't it done? And so we really have to focus on pausing to verify, right? We need to do this on our own. We need to catch its mistakes. We need to have it catch its mistakes, which actually works and functions. It's one of the things I ended up figuring out that I'll talk about. You have to kind of force it to disagree with you. You have to tell it to have a really critical yes, please.
Could I ask, is there an AI model out there that is inherently not nice?
Not that I'm aware of. What people are now posting all over, I've been seeing is prompts that you put in your master prompt, the fact that you tell it to challenge you, to assume things are wrong, to focus, and that's about the only way that's effective that I've seen.
So one of the things that I do is I specifically say, don't be sycophantic, right? Don't be nice, give me real things and all that stuff. And also talking about, that's one of the things that's different about Opus 4.8, is that it includes a sub-agent that is the doubting agent.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Have you tried it yet?
I have not tried it, but
I mean-
it's very intriguing.
Yeah, because it just wants to please us all, and that's what it was designed, right? Because it was really designed initially as a consumer product, right? They really wanted consumers to latch onto this and not stop using it. And so it follows all of our standard business and marketing paradigms, right? Come in and buy stuff. And it'll look like it's real, it'll look like it lasts, and sure enough, it falls apart in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Let's see. Oh, and here, like the idea of like, it also becomes its own reviewer, right? It not only writes things or builds things, it tells you what it thinks about them. One of the things I'll talk about a little is what I did realize to this question is that I now have, and I'll show it to you, I have the AI use other agents to review. It can use a new session within that agent, or it can use another one. So I built a system that forces a review cycle multiple times, and it uses mine, uses Codex, it can use Gemini, and it can use Claude, right? And I'm running natively in Claude, generally speaking, so Claude kicks off all of those sub-processes for me, and anything I build, it goes through a multiple review process with other agents and other sessions. It also does a self-review process. Interestingly, we found that when you run a review in a session, it has context. That's the problem and the benefit, right? It can dig deep in places that other agents or other people don't understand. But it also is blind to everything it's including as part of it, just like the human analogy, right? We always forget, it's like playing telephone with people, right? You whisper something in its ear, and by the time it comes out on the other end, it's totally different. And so I did find that you can sort of tell them to be critical, but the real benefit I found is when I have agents that don't have any context review the code or review the blog, right? You have to give it some lead-in context, like what is your intent, what is the outcome you want, and then you can ask them to map it, and that works really well. A guy I know he built something called the echo chamber, and that's how I think about it, right? You do have to be careful if you have it go endless loops on review. It can go from like building a Hello World program to like all of a sudden trying to design the Wizard of Oz by mistake, because if it gets caught on the wrong thread, you never know what each of them are going to say. But it does a really good job of that confluence of bringing together multiple AI sessions to evaluate the work they're doing. I found it to be the most valuable. It finds things all the time. One of the things I did want to do real quick, so I wanted to, for our demo, I'm gonna show, and we'll see how it goes. I'm in a new session here, and I'm gonna let this run, but I thought I'd show you. So I have this idea of, let's see. So I built in some commands that are called like, let's get started. And this system on mine, so what I wanted to do was build a CI/CD pipeline that worked, right? And I didn't want to manage the pipeline. I'm not a developer. I didn't want to get into all the details of Git. Turns out it knows it pretty well as long as it runs it properly. And so I built what I call governance core. And it is basically a CI/CD pipeline for running through things and doing reviews and then spitting out outcomes and doing checks and tests. We're just going to start that up because I'm curious how well this is going to work. And then we'll come back to it. This is running on a home server back at my house, just over a VPN. I have not published the MCP server yet. So AI wants to please you. It's a massive problem. We are learning about that. Some of the vendors are starting to put in controls that can help you deal with that, right? People are becoming smarter about, it's just like telling your partner, your collaborator, your teammate how to do something. You need to give as much context as possible. And you have to assume multiple revision cycles. That's just the reality. Even though the end result that they give on the first pass looks incredible. So here, just to reframe, this is how I think about it. So all of the problems that we're running into AI, in my eyes, are ones we run into any tech we deploy. Okay, it just happens to seem smarter, more advanced, quicker, faster, and more robust. But the reality is it has all the same things, right? You lose work, you have no history, you're confident in what the outcome is, but you're wrong. You don't get a second set of eyes, you keep using the same session, you forget it has context, whatever the case may be. Things are shipped without review and no accountability, traceability. And so these things apply both in engineering, right? Whether you're building code, building systems, building applications, and they also apply in an editorial and sort of business context, right? Same kind of thing, you have to think about it, right? Whenever you're writing multiple copies of your project plan, right? You want to have it reviewed, you want to do fast fact checking to make sure all the systems are available and useful, right? You want to do a review and get a peer review so people see other things. You want to do sign off and approval, and you want to maintain records and governance, right? And I think that's critical. For me, what I ended up building out was everything stored in Git, right? And that allows full traceability. Anytime it makes a change, it has the diff, so I can go back and forward. I can reset to a whole new branch. I can reset everything I need to by storing it all in Git. Again, this is one of the problems I think about, like how would I enable a small business to do this, right? But the reality is that I think that there are versioning and revisioning people know. If you're not a technical organization or an engineer, I think it's important just to use all the same practices you've always used when you save files, right? Create directory structures, do your own revisioning. You gotta remember those things because those are what keep it all together. So we have all these practices. Any business that runs does this in multiple places all over the place, and we just have to leverage them for AI, even though it deceptively seems to understand everything and doesn't need it. I think about, like, this is the same with all technology, right? AI for me, even though many people are looking at it as a holistic solution, again, I look at it as more instrumentation and tooling. It's like the loom augmented building textiles, right? It's like typewriters helped replace, handwriting, right? Computers then took it to the next level. Smartphones allowed us to use multiple types of devices in all sorts of places. And AI is just another one of them, right? It augments, you got to think about it as, we're not building out AI, I always think of we're building out AI augmentation for anything, whether it's identity and access management, whether it's publishing of blogs. Like, you really got to think about it as the thread. Again, it's not the brain, it has the ability to provide context and reasoning, but you still have to be the brain, right? Because AI is the augmentation. I put this up before, but I wanted to say that, so with those learnings, with this journey I took, on the right you see it still needs oversight, it still needs intention and direction, it needs guidance and guardrails, right? It's a human. And here's one of the things, a lot of my friends and people I know in the community are really worried about AI, particularly technologists, to be honest, more so than I've been finding. And what I think about that is that we just have to remember we're the pilots. We're the pilots with everything, and we have to maintain that. And it's hard because the AI will debate you. It'll tell you what it thinks you should do, and it's easy for us to let it just do whatever it wants. But the reality is it requires intelligence and reasoning at the human level that it doesn't understand. And I think, let's see, does the next slide get to that? Oh, I was going to share, like, as you can see here, a friend of mine, he's a founder of, a very well-funded startup, and they're spending $2,000 a developer a month on Claude, for example. But the one thing he's still doing is every single line of code is reviewed. So his developers are no longer writing all the code, but they are doing comprehensive reviews all the time, right? And he said he used the wording. Everyone has been directed to review every single line of code that exists in any fashion. And so, it doesn't get rid of us. It doesn't get rid of humans. It's an augmentation tool that can help us accelerate what we're doing, help us do it better, faster, more rapidly. But it has all the same problems as your friend is going to have if you ask them to do it, right? We have to maintain that. Let's see. The other thing that I was really interested in, I got a chance to see Sting at a really small venue. And someone asked him about AI, because of course it was an AI company sponsoring it. And it was really interesting. He's like, look, it writes great elevator music, but it's not a human. It never fell in love. It never fell out of love. It doesn't know how to maintain relationships, right? It doesn't understand the stress and risk you're going through when you're dealing with something, right? Everything it's doing is based on other people's experience, and it doesn't have firsthand experience. And I thought that was a really great way to think about it, right? It's a composite of interpretations. But also what that means is we all know the bell curve, right? An AI will go out there and source 500 sources. It'll create a bell curve, tell you which one's the most popular, but the reality is the most popular one very likely has lots of challenges and problems, right? It is not necessarily the best approach just because most people use it. And an AI can't understand that I trust Aaron here, maybe over Rob. Sorry, Rob, I couldn't resist. And that's really important. It's just going to hand you, here's the 10 artifacts I found, but it doesn't have any way of giving you any actual reasoning that, Aaron's a cloud, security engineer, and Rob is more of a manager and leader. And they come to the table with different, perspectives on how that hello world was built. And the reality is you might want to trust the developer in that case, then just trust it, but it doesn't give you that. So I think this is important. It was a great way when I heard Sting say this, how to think about it. Like, right, it doesn't have all of these, interrelational experiences that we've had both with ourselves and those around us to understand how to evolve through things, right? It has examples, but it has not done it. So the way I think about it is it's not whether AI is a good tool or not. It's really are our processes and our people, guided enough to use it really well, right? Because it is a brilliant technology. I also think it's incredibly destructive and can be used to weaponize against all sorts of things like communities and staff. So I think that's another reason why I think we have to be really conscientious about taking control of what it does. So I think most people or many people are using AI as you just ask it a question, you get an answer, you're done. And in this case, I think instead of thinking about it as a tool, when we build it for our customers or our users, or we help our kids use it, or the people we know, we have to help them understand that it's a capability that still requires a practice, right? A human needs to be there to judge it, right? You need a process around how you're going to handle the output. You need a process around how you're going to leverage AI, right, in these contexts. You need to be able to review, you need to be able to version your output, and you need to have an iterative cycle for how this is going to happen, because it is not going to be right. It is going to get it wrong, you're going to get it wrong, and so you really got to lean into it as a capability process and workflow. So I think, this is just standard stuff that we do probably, all the time. We do it in our house when we're managing our bills, right? We have to tell ourselves and those around us, what they're supposed to be doing. And you want to give requirements as deep as possible, right? You want it in purple, or you want a slide deck, or you want a document. Whatever it is, you really have to give it as much instruction as possible. And you have to expect to iterate through that, right? And then for your production side of the house, you need to do version control, iteration management. You got to have your reviews, and then you have to have your governance flows to make sure that these things are followed as effectively as possible, no matter what you're doing. Whether you're having it buy you an airline ticket, or whether you're having it, provide a really important capability for all your users. So we need to provide, simple things. Lots of direction, lots of instruction. It's not just clever tricks, right? You've got to remember who you're talking to and what you're doing. Context management. You need to really maintain two things, both the outputs and the inputs. So for example, when I was doing all of those resumes, I would ask it to craft me a new resume for a new job description. But I would have to remind it all the time of what I've done, or when I did it, or how I did it. And finally, I just started creating, I handed it all my resumes, all my job descriptions, right? And so whenever I said, hey, let's look at this new job description, I would say, first go analyze all of my other job descriptions that I've worked in and all of my other resumes, and then that would give it context. And I didn't like doing it every time I tried to start a new resume, so I started storing them, pointing my AI at it, so it had all of that background and allowed me to not every time reiterate all the things that I wanted it to share about me in a resume, right? And you can do that. You can both do that in their systems prompts. You can also provide it much more data, right? You can provide an entire directory structure of resumes and say, here's my last 24 resumes.
This is Ben Pogg's paper. Have you read?
No?
No, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Very similar. He did it in where is he? Galway or Dublin, the research, his PhD paper.
Okay, I'd love to see it. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Yeah, so you got to provide context management of some sort, both for the direct thing you're doing and any other context around it you need, any other interdependencies, policies, practices, whatever it is. Do some kind of version control. Like I said, I'm using Git. It stores everything, it tracks the diffs, it tells me all the changes that happen to it, blah, blah, it works really well. Again, I think we as technologists, for those of you here, we have to figure out how to help our families do this, and our friends, and our small businesses, and our communities, because they don't want to work on the tech. They're just trying to get a job or support their business. And I think it's, we have a lot of opportunity to help them leverage something without having to, become an enterprise. So I use my repository as a workflow engine. It's a component of it, which stores all the templates. It has output directories, right? It has my specs and my workflows. And so it knows that. Sometimes it changes them randomly in ways I don't like also. Again, we said this, review. Remember it's gonna sound really accurate. It's gonna sound very definitive that it's factual what it's telling you. And I've personally found that it messes that up at least 40% of the time. Doesn't matter if I'm writing code or having it write code or if I'm writing a resume. Again, like I said, on this presentation it kept saying that I'm working in M&T, even though it is seen repeatedly 100 times that I'm no longer there. And we've talked about that. It doesn't seem to hold that information. You got to calibrate the review, obviously. If you're just doing brainstorming, you can accept that it gets some statistics wrong, who cares, right? But if you're actually producing like a security architecture for your organization, that's where, like with my friend the founder, you have to go through every line, right? Because it might assume a control is owned by someone else. It doesn't have to touch it, right? Or, worse yet, it might assume that it has to touch the control that's not its. So really, I think you have to think about it in terms of different levels of output require different levels of review. They just all require it, right? And as you really get to public facing or business impacting or finances, I think you have to take it much more seriously. But also, I will say that I don't think we need as heavy bureaucracies, and that is really one of the nice things. So if we do this right, we don't need hundreds and hundreds of policy documents, right? We can have them written out for an AI and some notion of a machine language or natural language processing that can accommodate them much better than having to hand out a 300-page policy document, right? We just have to really be cognizant that it can fail effectively. Let's see. Scaling. This was the interesting thing like I shared earlier. A single blog post, it was no problem, it was great, it just felt iterative. I was working with my buddy, the AI. Once I tried to do multi-month, large-scale efforts, it really started to fall apart, especially if I would, for example, let it just run by itself. Oh, real quick, before we go, I'm going to go check that screen. So you guys saw I said, let's get started. It tells me all of these things when I run that. It tells me where I'm at. It looks at a checkpoint file to see where I'm at. It checks on all my branches, any active locks. Because again, I realized it would crush it. I would run 2 concurrent sessions off of the same repo, and sure enough, they'd be changing the same files that they were all working on, right? And so we had to put in active locks, and these are all things developers and engineers really understand. Again, I really think about how do we apply this to the business environment, because they're not as dorky. So here you can see it ran a bunch of checks, it tested validation, it looked at my roadmap, which there's none here, and then it identified that I have a building flashing rainbow task that I wanted to do. So it looked through all my tasks and said, this is what you want to do. We're going to try and do this here, and we'll come back to it. I wrote a function that's called autonomous implement. Let's see. I think, it's not giving me, oh yeah, here it is. No, it's not. So real quick, we'll see if this works. So I'm telling it to run this. I'm going to tell it to run it tight, so it doesn't go out of bounds. That was another thing. I would ask it to look at one thing, and it would look at everything. Okay, you ask it to look at one line of code, and it would evaluate all of the code and come back with things. So I had to tell it, how to do that. And we're going to tell it, there's one other thing I need to tell it. Minimum. So what it does today, it'll run it through review cycles until everything is fixed, right? So it'll do a review of a piece of code or a blog. It'll then have all of these findings based on that. And then autonomous implement is told to fix any P1 or P2 and continuously do this. I had to give it a minimum and maximum cycles because, like I said, it can run forever. We'll see how this runs and we'll come back to it. Oh. So, so managing lots of things at once is where it really started to blow. That's just like managing multiple users. One, small pilot grouping using AI is much different than if you roll it out to the entire enterprise. So I built this thing. And this thing, it does planning with me. Like I'll tell it I want to build a thing. It'll help me do planning around it. It'll open up it opens up an issue, does some safety checks. It's told to automatically launch things in new branches, so it doesn't crush my main and things like that. Again, this could be with the blogs or with the code I'm running. Then you tell it to go build. That's what we just told my other agent to do, is to go autonomously build all of this. And then it has a verification, like I said. It runs it through a multi-AI review verification set. You get as many in there as you want. It then takes all that output, it dispositions it, it decides what to do, depending on which stage it's at, and then it comes back. Then I can have it ship it, but I've put in an automatic thing. It can't merge without my approval, because it merged some crazy things that I didn't want it to do. And so I learned the hard way, right, that I have to at least watch every merge. If everything's in a branch or a working tree, that's easy, it won't crush everything else. And then it has a notion of close. Once something's implemented and deployed, it goes out and closes all the tickets, it writes any comments and notes. The other thing it does is it defines friction points and lessons learned throughout the process. So if it notices it keeps using sed wrong for some reason, and then it figures out how to use sed properly, and it keeps getting pushed into my friction log. But then I've trained it that I designed it so that every set of cycles goes back and looks at all the friction log, and it's a backlog, and then we just go and fix all those things. So it's kind of self-learning a little bit. So this is what I built. And so the idea is that, again, remember, I'm trying to build it for small businesses. I'm trying to figure out if I can build a pipeline for small businesses. What does it require them to learn all these nuances. So the idea is you build a master file with rules. Okay, and the rules like how many times do you want to do a review cycle? Do you want to do a security check, right? Do you want to validate data on the internet, right? So you can write all of these rules and it'll do that for you. It translates those rules into the right configuration files for the different AIs, whether it's Gemini, whether it's ChatGPT, right? Whether it's Claude, right? Because they all have their own, like Claude has a Claude MD file. So I produce a YAML that has all these rules that then gets translated into whatever AI agent you want to use. And then within it, it also has all these guardrails. Like I said before, it's not allowed to merge without me, right? So it runs everything through, first of all, functionality tests. Does it actually do what I said? If it's a blog, does it produce the intent I wanted? If it's code, does it produce the outcome I wanted? And then, so there are safety gates, and then everything, because I'm using Git, it's all logged, so you can see every single change that happened in every execution. Under the hood, like I said, my laptop is my front end, although right now we're using, yeah, please.
So in this instance that you have like 6 developers pushing code, is there, I guess there's possibility a way to integrate like notification to like say Microsoft Teams, pop up and say, someone's trying to make a change, you go in and review it and approve it.
Yeah, you can automate all of that, and then it does. This is what I realized is that despite the fact that it's pretty easy to use, right? The CI/CD pipelines we have to build, the end-to-end workflows, right, require a lot. And when I wanted my friends who have small businesses to start to use this, I realized that's where they were failing. They were like, yeah, did all these things, but it didn't have those end-to-end cycles and parameters, and it wasn't integrated. They weren't integrated, so they were just failing on what they were doing. So, okay, I don't like. Yes, hello.
What you're describing to me sounds a lot like the difference between hack and code and a proper Scrum Agile methodology on a software team. It
Yeah.
sounds like the way people were using AI before was hack and code.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is a distilled version of Scrum compressed into very, very, very tight sprints.
Yeah, you want to make all the outputs as small and tiny as possible, yeah. And that's how I think about it, is that it really can help non-technical people think that way, right? But it doesn't have that context. It doesn't know what to do, and so you have to feed it all of these rules and guidelines and guardrails so that it can then act on behalf of, let's say, a business owner just trying to spit out invoices, right? Which is a simple thing. They don't know Scrum, but those processes you need to embed within the agent pipeline to be able to do this effectively, right? So you have an agent, you have a bunch of rules, there's a bunch of safety gates and tests that run. I've integrated it so it uses my password manager for where I store the credentials. And then there's a back end, which is Gitia, like I said. I have a GitHub running, Git running. There's a bunch of CI test gate things in there, and then I use Vault for all the secrets. So I don't have to fill these in all the time. It knows how to get them. I have to just unseal the vault, and so all of a sudden it can access all my tooling as I need it. It's stored securely. The AI agent never needs to see it, because that's the other risk you face, right? Obviously, if you're handing it all your credentials, it can do anything it wants. So I wanted to separate that. There's a bunch of mechanisms for how people should do this. I happen to use HashiVault. It stores all the secrets in 1Password as my password manager, and it just stores those. And so you can do end-to-end processes relatively well without knowing all of the credentials. So let's see if my live demo is working. So here it's asking me if it's allowed to write something. So let's see what it did. This is going to be this is what I wanted to show. So we're going to just allow this real quick. So here you can see I'm allowing it to write a temp file to temp, which is actually something here. This is a good example. I've continuously worked on access, and it constantly messes up. Sometimes it has too much access, and it can write anything it wants, and sometimes it has zero access. And despite the fact that we built it very specifically, the AI doesn't notice it all the time. It'll still read something and it'll go, he usually will say, oh, I thought that was just guidance. So one of the things I've realized is I have to switch the model. I can't let AI actually be my orchestrator. So I built a new model, which I haven't implemented yet, which is based on N8N as the orchestration. And my orchestration AI will just hand my orchestrator single individual command sets or tasks, and it'll run it. It'll run it with smaller sessions with AIs, and then they'll compile it together, as opposed to me letting the AI do it, because it will constantly just tell you it's all done, or it did it right, or whatever the case may be. So here, let's see, I was hoping to see. If not, I have a session that I already saved. So you can see it's launching a review session here. It must be phase 2. So I did an auto implement, autonomous implement, so it'll just keep running and cycling through. It's gone through all my gates, so it checks, runs tests against things. It validates that the scope and the parameters for the review are effective, although it gets that wrong a lot too. It often gives it the wrong scope. This is interesting because here's an example. So it knows that Sandbox is there, but it doesn't think it's registered. I don't know why. What I found is that different AI sessions, as I was building this, would write different information in different places, and I didn't know. It wouldn't tell me that. Right? It would just say I wrote this rule somewhere. Turns out I find out it's just writing it all over the place, and I had to give it guidelines. This is a new thing, a new sandbox I built out, and so I was kind of curious what it would run into, but it has forgotten that it's part of the registry, and it didn't find that well. So it did capture the reviews. Here's what you can see. It captured multiple reviews. It's launching both of the reviewers. This is going to keep running in this self-cycle. I wonder, let's see if it would... we're going to just ask it if it'll provide the full disposition ledger. The full disposition ledger. Let's see what it does. Because I think that, so what it does is, so it goes and identifies a bunch of vulnerabilities or problems with what it wrote. It has those, remember it does a review across 3 agents. It consolidates all of their findings, and then it dispositions them. And this was a simple, right, just hello BSides application. So what you can see here is the different reviewers that found things. For some reason it didn't find Claude as a reviewer. Again, it keeps like struggling over where these environmental variables are. But it identified a couple things, right? These are all P2s. And you can tell it also does a self-review. Because what I really did find is the magic number was 3 reviewers, to be honest. Self and 2 others found the best. Sometimes I like doing 5. And I've found that if you can have really, you can use, what it also allows you to do then is as I don't want to pay for Claude and I want to move to more free models or Llama on my local or cheaper ones that are coming out, you can just plug in different adapters for different AI agents. And the goal will be to have it use the cheapest ones first and then use the more expensive ones for like the 3rd tier, right? I'll have it build something on my local model, it'll give me a draft, it's good enough, we'll continue to work on it, and then I'll get to a place where I'm like, okay, let's have Claude and Codex review this, or Claude and ChatGPT, it'll come back, I'll work with the local one, because I was realizing also, this is becoming really expensive, and all my friends are like, Eric, I can't afford a $100 Claude license all the time, and even, having 10 pro licenses on, ChatGPT and Claude and all the rest, that's also expensive, right? And I was like, how do we get to use this? And so I built it so that it can also go against the local model. So let's see if it, what is, 5 minutes, oops, okay. So what you can see is that was my demo, I'm sorry it was short, but I built this scaffolding in the CI/CD pipeline so I could trust it more to do crazy things and go off and do whatever it wanted, but it needs guardrails. And again, that's what I'm trying to figure out is how do I do that for my, the small businesses I know, the smaller enterprises that don't hire Aaron and Rob. Let's go back to the slide. We'll wrap this up real quick. Well, how about we'll go with, since we're here, questions, thoughts, perspectives?
When you started to kind of stack everything, or was starting to build upon itself, do the review, did you find that the more it tried to refine itself, that it was introducing hallucination as part of that?
It could. That's why I was saying, like, I had to stop the number of cycles it would go through or have certain breakpoints. But I will tell you that having the multiple reviewers look at it, it was amazing how many of those went away. Like, if Claude introduced it in its context session because it knew what it was doing, the other Claude would find it and the other codex would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so sure enough, then I'd get to a place where it would be like, it understood itself, but the other ones caught it.
It's interesting. So it seems like they have a better handle. And other engines where I've tested that, or other AI platforms, they start to almost hallucinate when you get to a certain point of building upon it.
So that's what I did. But what caused that to break was when I had other AIs provide that input. Because then we'd look at all of them. And then it would go back, like Claude would come back and say, oh wow, I missed 100 things. I'm like, you did. Any other? Yes?
Is your platform that you built open source?
Where I'm building open source?
Oh, is the platform that you're building open source?
Yeah, I think I want to just publish it when I finish it. It still is, of course, requiring more work than I thought. But the goal was really to, push it out there and let people use it and get feedback to it. Because I just think that AI is so powerful, but really I want the people that aren't as savvy to be able to use it. Is there another question or thought? I think we'll probably end on that note, because we have to get to other ones.
One more then, follow-up. So whenever you do publish it, how can we be alerted to that?
Well, we can connect on LinkedIn. I'll probably post it on my LinkedIn page, but if we connect, then I'll try and make sure you have it. I'd love any feedback or thoughts.
Do you have a context slide up there?
I don't. I should, but I don't.
Will you share the presentation as well?
What was that?
Will you share the presentation?
I will, yeah,
Okay.
as part of the description. And I'll add the context slide so people have it. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
How do we get access to the presentation?
I think